I'm going to ask you a question, and there's no wrong answer here. What do you think is the worst role-playing game in video game history? I can hear the arguments for Lunar Dragon Song of the DS. The baffling decisions those developers made created an absolute butchery of the Lunar name. Maybe Quest 64 is your take on it. Just because you're the first RPG on a given system doesn't excuse your story to be flatter than the state of fucking Florida. Or perhaps you lean more into the cash cow franchises, both past and present, but with the likes of Final Fantasy XIII, Breath of Fire Dragon Quarters, Suikoden 4, or maybe a franchise not known for RPGs taking the plunge and instantly drowning like Sonic Chronicles did. Regardless of your answer, you must have a pretty valid argument to consider it the worst. But I'd like you to put that opinion aside for just a bit and take a look into this void. Deep within this black hole, you will find a perfect storm of awfulness. A glitch-ridden shitshow that makes even Gollum look flawless in comparison. You will find Hoshi wo Mirohito. For those out in its native Japan, they call it something else entirely. The legendary shitty game. But before I talk about the game, I would like you to consider hitting that subscribe button if this video was worth your time. As a one-man operation, any support is appreciated, and I thank you in advance if you do so. Now that that's out of the way, let's take a step back and figure out how this game came to be in the first place. 27 May 1986, one of the most important dates in gaming history. If you don't know why, that's because it was the release date of the first Dragon Quest for the Famicom, paving the way for the genre we now know as the Eastern RPG. It's pretty bare bones by today's standards, yes, but what mattered was that it was a massive hit. It was selling like onigiri out there. And of course, the game's success brought upon the eyes of many other video game companies, who in turn would set out to create their own games in an attempt to make a better model than what Dragon Quest put out. In the midst of these early dark ages, two particular names would stand out. One was Sega, who was trying to do everything that everybody wasn't doing, and that resulted in the first Phantasy Star for the Sega Master System, while Square decided to completely rip off Dungeons & Dragons to create the first Final Fantasy for the Famicom. Both of these games were released on the tail end of 1987. Of course, both of these games would be major successes and would go on to have franchises that continue to this day. But a little under 2 months prior to these games being released, another notable RPG came out on the Famicom on October 27th. That was Hoshi wo Mirohito, and while its contemporaries would have successes in their own right, this game would be notable for all the wrong reasons. In fact, it has such a notorious reputation that Japanese gamers aren't simply content with calling it a kusoge, translation shitty game. Instead, they hail it as the Densetsu no Kusoge, Densetsu being legend. It takes a special kind of dumpster fire to get that moniker, so why is this game the one to be called such? Well, in order to find out, I gotta dive deeper. Let's start with the game's story, which is actually pretty good considering the time period this game was released in. The story involves a rogue supercomputer known as Crew 3, which managed to successfully brainwash humanity to drive itself to the brink of annihilation. The only ones immune to this brainwashing are those with extrasensory powers. Crew 3 takes care of this loophole by hiring bounty hunters to kill them off. Eventually it boils down to just 4 psychic children, obviously the 4 playable characters of the game, being the only hope in stopping the supercomputer. That's pretty much the gist of it. Actually, now that I've read and thought about it, I see some similarities to this story and Phantasy Star 2 on the Mega Drive, a game that also featured a supercomputer going rogue, albeit for different reasons. A couple other neat ideas were thrown in as well, most prominently your characters growing up as they leveled up and multiple endings being possible. For a game that wasn't even a year and a half removed from Dragon Quest being released, there was quite a bit of ambition here. So how does a game like this end up with the title of the legendary shitty game? Well, you know all that story and goodwill heading into this game? Literally all of it gets thrown into a blast furnace and torched the second you press the start button. Now as I play this game, I would like you to pay attention to the number at the top left corner of the screen. This represents the number of potential bugs and issues you will find playing the game for just 5 game minutes. Already we've got one from the word go. As soon as you press start, you're in the overworld without a clue as to where you are or even where to go. Dragon Quest puts you in front of King Lorcan Tentacle Castle, Phantasy Star starting off in Caminite, and while Final Fantasy also puts you in the overworld, Canaria was right front and center. Hoshi puts you in the middle of no man's land without a single landmark in sight. Note that I say in sight. Your first town? Well, it's right here. Yeah, you saw that. Your first town, and in fact most structures, are completely invisible on the world map. What's especially crazy about this is that this is not a bug of any sort. It's outright intentional as told by the NPCs. They are hiding the structures to prevent from being hunted. Speaking of NPCs, you probably noticed that the player character manages to move at a fucking snail's pace. It's saying something when you are supposed to be a young boy, and you manage to move slower than the elderly. Slower than the elderly. Apparently being a psychic is a massive weight on you and you can't move as fast as everybody else. Tellingly, a lot of hacks this game has allow you to move faster than this. For about the first half of the game, there is only one place to heal your character, and that's this NPC in the first town. Even in the second half of it, this place remains the only equivalent of an inn the entire game. You're gonna be coming here a whole hell of a lot. This is somewhat mitigated by yet another problem. To my knowledge, there's only one exit destination in the entire game, right back at the same spot you started the game from. Technically, this likely isn't something you'll see within the 5-minute window, and being next to the first town is perfectly acceptable. You only really see this after the second destination. However, as it's a persistent game-wide problem, I'm retrofitting this in. As for buying new equipment, oh boy, have I got a doozy for you. First things first, when you buy a new weapon for a character, it's an automatic equip. That's fine, but what sucks is that you cannot remove it under any circumstances. Even more damning than this, when you get a better weapon, the previous weapon you have is immediately wiped from your inventory and you get no chance to sell it off. That's not without talking about the utter trite that is the cheapest weapon available in the game in the ray gun. One of this game's most notorious errors is the fact that this cheap weapon manages to do less damage to enemies than your own bare fists. This is actually more of a technical oversight. You see, enemy defense in this game is scaled towards the weapons you've got, and the ray gun, of course, is affected by this. Attacking unarmed, however, means there's no weapon to scale defense with. This results in enemy defense being 0, and that's the reason the ray gun is about as useless as a government run by dinosaurs. Speaking of fighting enemies, that's a whole different can of worms. Your first battle can be, wait, 5 HP?! I mean, I can take a challenge, but holy shit! As I was saying, your first battle, and indeed most in the game, can be a complete and total crapshoot. Of course, you've got several actions to take, but you may notice one very glaring problem. There is no escape command. That's right, you cannot escape from any battles. Well, actually you can, but it requires getting a certain psychic ability that lets you do so, but even that's a total dumpster fire. My personal favorite game, Panzer Dragoon Saga, also didn't let you escape from enemies until you got the Escape Berserk. But all the enemies in that game were manageable in some way, shape, or form. On the other hand, this game can either give you a tolerant fight that you can manage, or get you fucked with a nuclear warhead and then fired out of it from the word go. In terms of making a move, you better be 100% sure you're going for your exact target, because if you go into a second menu, you cannot go back to the previous one. That's right, there is no way to backtrack to previous menus. This means that, for example, you're looking for a psychic power of interest, and turns out you don't have enough energy to cast it. Well, sucks to be you. You have to cast it anyway, and therefore lose your turn. Well, at this stage in the game, all I can really do is attack, so I'll do it against this enemy, and, well, shit. Its turn comes, I get hit for 14, which means... Wait, what? This is another notorious error the game has. The ones digit of your HP is truncated. You didn't start with 5 HP, you started off with 50. This means me getting hit for 14 means I have 36 HP, not 3. This can result in the rather amusing sight of being 0 HP yet still alive, because technically you have 1 to 9 HP. I can't even make any of this shit up, holy fuck. Well, I finally made it to level 1, but it took like 7 or 8 attempts and I actually need to do something. So I'll just go on over here and save, and oh boy. Okay, the problem isn't the fact that it's a password system to save. At this point in time, battery backup wasn't all that common because it resulted in higher manufacturing costs. If a game actually saved on the Famicom, more often than not it was on the Famicom disk system. What is the problem is twofold. This particular password is only 15 characters long, split into groups of 5. Honestly, it's not all that egregious, especially as a role-playing game. When putting the actual password in, however, you start to realize that each character space can be represented by one of 131 potential symbols. Those include the English alphabet, numerics, Japanese kanji, and a couple other symbols for good measure. But that's not all. The 15 characters is a bit misleading, since the actual password system can be increased to up to 35 potential character spaces. This naturally results in a slow-motion car crash the farther you go into the game, as it becomes more and more difficult to simply record the damn thing. Okay, I put the password in. And everything looks fine. Let's just take a look at our status. Where the hell is my gold? Yep, even the password save feature doesn't work as intended. You lose all your gold with every password saved, and I think your items as well. I also heard that even your level wasn't safe, as it rounded down to the nearest multiple of 4. However, after putting that password in, as you see, I was still at level 1. I actually went a little bit farther on my own terms to level 2 to see if there was anything different. I got a slightly different password, put it in correctly, and upon loading it up, of course I did lose my gold, but I was still at level 2. I'm probably completely missing something since that is a very common report, but it is something to note. So if you end up saving the game at level 3, and next thing you know you end up back at level 0 when you restart, well, you may as well restart the whole game. I'm pretty certain I missed a couple other nitpicks that could be found within this time frame, but I picked off all the major ones. Look at that. Look at that. 14 major errors, all of which can be found over the course of just 5 game minutes. And all of them possibly within 15 to 20. And that's not even getting into the more egregious stuff that comes later in the game, such as not getting a proper battle menu until you get your second party member, and speaking of them, you can't see their equipment or statistics whatsoever, only Minami's. Add yet even more shit not working the way they're intended, up to the point where it's going full big rigs come the final quarter of the game. One of the endings wasn't even programmed in either. Should you try to go that route, it's an instant game over and back to the title screen. This game is truly a flaming wreckage of a plane crash, and I'm not exactly sure that's a good enough description of it. But the thing is, Japan likes it this way. You see, Japan mostly tends to hold these kind of games, especially from this time period, in a rather ironic light. It's kind of like enjoying a bad movie like The Room or Who Killed Captain Alex. Compare that to the Western world, where we simply bury the game in a landfill and hope everybody forgets it ever happened. Or in this day and age, nuke the servers to the point where even physical copies, if any exist at all, are completely useless. Then again, it seems they may have taken a page out of Japan's culture. After all, we did manage to get fucking Plumbers Don't Wear Ties released on the modern consoles. Wait, really? What the fuck? Speaking of nuclear dumpster fires getting onto modern consoles, that's exactly what happened to this game. It actually got ported onto the Switch Virtual Console back in 2020. However, despite discussion that it could get a global release, albeit completely untranslated, it remained a Japan exclusive, which was probably for the best. In addition, this game didn't just get one fan remake, it got 2. Both of them far more competently developed than the original game. Of course, both these fan remakes are only in Japanese, and to my knowledge, there has not been a single translation of any kind to either of them. Speaking of translations, you're probably wondering how most of the footage is in English. Well, given this game's reputation, of course I got a fan translation. The first English translation came in 2008, and just like this game, it was an unfinished, garbled car crash. Honestly, it's kind of fitting. It wouldn't be until late November 2023 before somebody finally stepped up to the plate and released a complete translation. If you plan on diving headfirst into this dumpster fire, first off I recommend you pick up this translation so you don't have to deal with any Japanese kanji, and second and more importantly, you do so at your own sanity's risk. Even with Japan's ironic enjoyment of this game, does it truly deserve the title of the worst RPG ever made? Yes. Yes it does. You have seen firsthand the sheer ineptitude this game has. The type of ineptitude that redefines your meaning of shit. However, I also believe that this is one of those games that must be played to be believed. It is a textbook example of a game that is so bad at what it intends to do that it's outright hilarious. And while I consider it the worst RPG in video game history, nothing I say is ever going to change its reputation. It wholeheartedly earned its title as the legendary shitty game. It's a game that will be enjoyed, at least ironically, for years to come. Hey everybody, Eclipse14 here, thanks for watching. I probably missed a lot of key points about this game, but considering it's such a huge rabbit hole, if I really dived into it, I'd have been over half an hour long with this video, and I simply didn't want to do that. If you like what you saw, feel free to drop a like, and if you think my work is worth your time, please consider hitting that subscribe button, I would greatly appreciate it. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you on my next video.